to you from underneath a peach blossom. It's time for an episode of Be Awesome. Find positivity throughout your life and work, just like our mascot rooster, Steve the Jerk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Be Awesome podcast, episode 135. Hard to believe we're going just over a month away from our 7-year Be Awesome anniversary and have had so much fun. But we haven't had a podcast. I just found out, being reminded by our fantastic producer Adam, that we haven't done a podcast since like March 19th, was 6 days after the release of Be Awesome's first book. And we have had a whirlwind tour, book signings, keynotes, all sorts of craziness. We actually broke the top 100,000 books being sold in the world this week, which is pretty cool. And even though I don't hit my midlife crisis until next month, turning 50, we were a bestseller in the Best Midlife Self-Help category. And we've got a guest today. I'm excited. I was able to listen to a little bit of his keynote, but the energy that he provided to the attendees, I had multiple people at the event say, you got to have Mike on the podcast. I didn't know he's Dr. Mike. He's Dr. Michael Durnin, and he's out of Wisconsin, and he's got an amazing story. And he is a servant leader. He is working through, he's doing keynotes all over the place. And I loved reading that he helps individuals and teams by delivering strategies for navigating chaos by building a foundation of leadership. So we're going to dig into this, a whole bunch more, and the power of 7 yards. So Mike, welcome to the podcast. And I know you've done more podcasts because it says podcast guest. So you've done this before. So seasoned veteran, welcome first and foremost, my friend.
Well, Josh, it is truly an honor to be here and be a part of your show. And I congratulate you on the book. I've had the opportunity to read the book. And for anybody in the audience who has not, you need to get this book and read. There is so much great information, and it's all about life, and which I love hearing people's stories about life. And, because we all learn from each other. And as I'll get into later, my handful of L's, my first L is continue to learn. And one of the best ways you learn, through conversation.
Yeah.
And so it is truly an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, and thank you. And I will never profess to being the smartest person in the room. I'll never profess to having all of the answers in anything that I write, read, or talk about. But it really is, it's that simple. I was reminded in Texas, I had someone that I knew in the audience, and he came up. He hasn't read the book yet, got his copy on Tuesday. And he said, man, I can't thank you enough. You just gave me all the reminders that have been in my life, sitting there looking at me. You gave me so many reminders of what I should be doing. Just simple, stupid stuff. Just be aware of what's going on around you. Just listen. When you talk to people, one of the things that I try to do with my and I've failed recently. I've had some. We can talk leadership failures because I've done it. I've had a number of failures this week, and I know where they came from, and it started with me. But one of the biggest things is communication. The worst thing that you can think happened is that two people actually communicated. You said something and someone heard it. It often is disconnected. So, hey, I'm sitting in an elevator at the Kalahari, right? And you walk in, and I look at you and I say, man, you look like an interesting guy. What is it that you do in the world? Give me your elevator pitch.
Great question to start off with. I basically look, I think about my purpose, my why in life. And it's living life, creating transformation of myself and others to be better every day. And one of the things that I think is really important, you already just mentioned what I think is truly important. We all must realize there are going to be setbacks. There are going to be challenges. We are going to fail, which is in essence that first attempt in learning. And we need to embrace those setbacks, embrace those challenges. Many times I talk about crucible events. Those are those unplanned, life-changing events. They can be really small things that happen in our lives, like all of a sudden we're stuck in traffic and we can't get to where we want to be. Mm-hmm. That's unplanned. So how do you embrace that? How do you do that? And one of the great things that, this is where I think it's so important. You continue to study, you continue to read, continue to have conversation. I was reading information, D. Hawk, who used to be the CEO for Visa. And I think everybody's familiar with Visa. We all have it in our back pocket, right? Yep. We have that card. But he started introducing a term called chaotic leadership. And he basically is saying putting chaos comes in the order of your lives.
Yep.
But then if you look at the scientific, aspect of fusion, fusion is taking molecules, put them together to come up with something stronger. Well, that's what we do in our lives.
Yep.
If we're open to it, we embrace it. We take the chaos, fuse it into our lives, and we become a better person. Not perfect, because none of us are perfect. And every time I think I'm getting close to be perfect, all I got to do is walk upstairs, talk to my wife, and I know I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
Okay? So, but when you take those things, like I said, that fusion of chaos and order, put it together, it becomes a beautiful thing. And I love helping people. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is sitting there and listening to their stories.
Yeah.
And embracing their stories. And when you do that, and I talk about this, I have a slide sometimes I use when I do keynotes. It's of two water spouts coming down. Mm-hmm. One is hitting a brick, and one's hitting a sponge.
Yeah.
Well, the one that's hitting the brick, the water goes all over the place. But the sponge is soaking it in.
Yeah.
So our goal to be great human beings, to be leaders, be a sponge.
Yeah.
Soak it all in. Yeah. So there's a little bit of really what I do, and I just try to take different stories and share that and basically enlighten people, say, you're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all have work to do. Here's some guidelines, here's some things to do, but you're okay.
Yeah, you I got to tell you the story because it was on my way over here this morning. I called Adam and I said, "Hey man, I'm on my way. I'm gonna stop and get water and a coffee because we got a long day. We're in the studio for 6 hours. We're recording the audible of the book and doing podcasts, and so I'm inevitably, I try not to ever be late for anyone, but now I'm running late for Adam, and he's probably the most understanding person I know. And I pull out a honeydew with my coffee. I'm excited. I hit the gas. I'm going at a good clip, and this guy just pulls right around me, passes me, double solid line, and I laughed. Like I laughed immediately because if it was me 15 years ago, I would have chased that person, probably passed them, given them the finger, done any number of things, right? Because, I was probably the brick in some way, and a different metaphor. And I'm glad I didn't have a brick in my car 15 years ago because I might have thrown it out the window at him. But
might not be here.
But I just kind of smirked because I was like, that person. I was late and I was in a hurry, and this guy passed me, and all I immediately did was I just smirked, and I'm like, he must be in a hurry to go someplace more important than where I need to go. And so he was in front of me. He couldn't pass the car in front of him. And we have I don't even know what to call it. It's a facility for children and adults with developmental differences. Yeah. And that's where he pulled in. And I was just like, he could have a child or an adult child, the adult that he cares for, that he's the caretaker for, that's having a problem there. And that's why he did that. And if I got mad and I did everything, I just made that person's day that much worse. And I just kind of laughed at myself because I'm like, I would have made that person's day more difficult because of these things that I didn't know 15 years ago, and because I had a short fuse, and because I felt like I was the only person going through something. And I probably didn't know how to handle it. And I literally just had this on the way over here. And I was smirking because I'm just sitting here listening to you. I'm like, yeah, that's life. That's how life is. Like, how do we? And that's why when I read your tagline, I'm like, oh man, strategies for navigating chaos. I've had about 6 of those instances just today so far, driving to the studio, and I'm like, navigate me through this chaos, Mike. I need it. I need some of it. So
there you go. Well, that's what it's all about. And I think when maybe it is that maturity. Sometimes as we kind of get along in years and have experienced all these things. Though I will admit, I have seen some young people who do a great job of this, and my guess is they've had some great teachers and mentors along the way to help them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
And that's why I always talk about one of the first things people say, "What's the first thing you got to do?" I say, "Stay calm."
Yeah.
Somehow, Mel Robbins talks about her, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
And she talked, I mean, it makes sense. In somebody else, it might be something else. You might give yourself a word, or you do a breathing pattern, whatever the case may be. But you got to bring yourself back, because if you explode, as you well know, we've all been there.
Yeah.
When we explode, we make things worse.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't, and especially if you make it worse and you don't know that whole story on the other side.
Yeah.
Then you're really making, it's almost like a double negative kind of thing, but it's not ended up in a positive.
Yeah.
With it. So, that to me is crucial.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. So you read Let Them?
Yep.
You have? Don't break all of the secrets on it, because I'm only on like page 9. I don't know what page I'm on because I'm listening to it. That's why I'm doing an audible of my book, because I'm like, man, I listen to books more than I read them. Although I read mine. It's pretty darn good, right, Adam?
Yeah.
Adam's listening to me read. He's getting the first look at it. In theory, a lot of this stuff is great. Like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is great to in theory, but there's very few people that can actually think about, and I'll get it wrong, but the 5 things that they see, the 4 things that they hear, the 3 things that they smell, the 2 things. When you're in that moment, it's important for us to practice being in that moment when we're not in that moment.
Yeah.
I do a mindfulness and meditation program with Will Schneider and John McCaskill, Men Talking Mindfulness podcast. These guys are phenomenal. So if you're not uncomfortable thinking about doing things like breathing exercises with others, this is they do a program. It's on Zoom once a week, and I think 8 to 16 week increments. And it's a bunch of guys. You get Navy SEALs. John McCaskill's a retired Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
Will is a yoga meditation hippie in New York City, as he refers to himself. And we had people from the UN, we had military, we had all sorts of stuff. And that was a year ago. And using that practice, it's not perfect either, by the way. I still blow up, and I could still have issues or challenges from time to time. I'm only human. But if you can do it a lot more than if you can control yourself a lot more than you don't control yourself, then you're doing better than you probably were.
Here is something, Josh, as you're talking there, I'm thinking about, and it resonates with me about there's no perfect method. One of the things, I spent the last 5 years of my career, I was the dean of students. I was in charge of student life at the University of Dubuque. And which that meant part of my responsibility as I was on call when emergencies, chaos was happening on campus. This could be, a fight could be getting ready to start. I could have a medical emergency, suicide attempt, water main is broken and we're going to have to move people around. And of course, none of those things happen between 8 and 5, okay, during the day. They all happen at night. And at the time, I lived about, 5 to 10 minutes, depending on traffic lights and what time of day from campus. Whenever I would get the call and I knew I needed to head to campus, I made sure I jumped in the car, and as I was going, that's when I basically said, Mike, make sure you stay calm when you get there. Approach it as a professional, be calm, and no matter what you are going to deal with. and people, when I got towards the end, when I got ready to retire, people said, "How did you do that? You know, you walked into some sticky situations. You know, we had a person who was, you know, convulsing and in a medical state, and we had another situation. We had a young student who had tried to take their life by, you know, basically cutting their wrist. Okay.
Wow.
And so you're walking into these things, and people say, "How did you stay calm with those things?" I said, "Well, I prepped for it ahead of time. So the chaos, while unplanned, in essence, I had already prepared for it.
Right.
I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was trying to prepare for it as best I could ahead of time. And so for me, that was something that really, really helped. And people, you know, for all those years of doing that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I tell you, I love it. I think that that's a talent that it takes a long time for you to. You have to know to prepare yourself to go into something and say, all right, let's remain calm, and then you're thrown into it, even saying it over and over again. That internal tremble that you get, I'm sure you still get it from time to time, where there's frustration, there's aggravation, there's you know, defeat. There's all these different feelings, and to just stay, it's hard.
Yeah, it's very hard. And one of the things years ago, as you alluded to, I spent a great part of my career as a college football coach. And I had a mentor. One of my mentors said, when you get ready for every game, prepare, in essence, 4 talks for afterwards. Talk about if you won and won big, how are you going to approach that? You won and it was really close. You lost and it was really close. Or you just got your butts handed to you.
Yeah.
It just wasn't even close. And that actually, I've used that, and I transposed that into what I was doing in student life in the same way. Try to have some strategies ahead of time. And that's the over-planning that sometimes college football coaches do, is you look at that. And so that's kind of been my mantra. And I always felt like, if I could be calm, and the calmer I was, the more I could de-escalate a situation.
So I'm going to talk football, but you just hit me with 2 things that I want to hit you with.
Okay.
All right. The first one, you just gave those 4 talks in a football game.
Yep.
What talk were you giving your team on March 13th of 2020 when COVID hit? Because you didn't retire until 2023.
Oh, actually, I was not coaching at.
No. The school, when you were at the school, what were you telling? What were you telling your team and students when March 13th? What talk is that?
I was in student life at that time.
Yeah.
So this is even a better story, I think, Josh. So in 2018, all right, or actually, January 2018, the president of the university came and said, "Mike, how would you like to do us a favor?"
Yeah.
Now, when the president of the university, and Josh, I know you're well aware of.
Yeah.
Education world, because you speak to people in the education world all the time. When the president comes up and asks you that question, you basically have 2 choices.
Yeah.
You either say yes,
You pack
or
your
start
bags.
working on your resume.
Yeah, pack up. Yeah.
Okay. So I said yes, and then he goes, "Well, here's what I want you to do, Mike. I want you to stop being a football coach. I want you to be in charge of student life of our entire campus."
How many kids?
There was like 1,000 undergrads.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And I said, "Jeff, my background was never in student life.
Yeah.
My background was teaching and coaching. And with athletic administration aspects in there, so facilities, etc. I'm not qualified to be in that world." And he looked at me and goes, "Mike, you're exactly what I want, because I know how you think. I know how you process things. I know what your vision is and what you believe. I don't care about what your degrees say." And I said, "Okay, let's go for it." First 2 days, I'm on the job. I have a racial incident that's making national news. And I have a Title IX sexual assault case between two students.
Wow.
And I remember going into the president's office on the second day, and he looked at me and goes, Mike, he's as calm as could be. And I already kind of prepped. I was coming in to meet about these things. He goes, Mike, just remember one thing. You're not allowed to resign. Okay?
Wow.
And you're gonna be fine. We're gonna work through this, and we're gonna go. Great learning experience. Fast forward to January of 2020, before the United States kind of went on this COVID bit. I remember looking at what was happening overseas, and I called the chief of staff of the president. I said, Amy, this is going to hit, and we need to be ready for this. We met that week. This was the third week of January, and we started meeting. What started for once a week became every day, sometimes twice a day, as COVID hit. And my job was to go around, talk to people, ease people's minds, and saying, we're going to be okay. Everybody stay together. Here we go. And even though we closed our campus, we actually, because of our mission, felt it was important. We actually left one residence hall open so that students who basically would have been in a worse position by going home could stay.
Wow.
Even though, and so we had to have plans put together, how we're going to feed them, take care of their health, all those things.
Yep.
And we went through that entire COVID period, and we actually came back that fall at full capacity.
Wow.
We put people in residence. We had a plan in place. We weren't perfect with the plan, but we were way under any numbers that were happening around the country.
Yeah.
With everybody there. So that experience really resonated with me about, one, you do need to plan. And you need to think about how this all fits in. And don't lose, remember I said my own personal objective in life, live life creating transformation of self and others, be better every day.
Yeah.
And we had a little saying at the University of Dubuque, to be caringly intrusive, which means step out of your comfort zone, take care of others.
Right.
And so to do that, to me, the decision was really easy to keep that residence hall open.
Yep.
Because we were living our mission.
Yep.
Even though we were taking some chances, we were doing things that others thought we were crazy doing. We were living our mission, and we believed we had a good way of doing it. So
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love it, and I think it speaks volumes because I've had this conversation with a lot of people because I'm just, you don't think about things until after they happen, and I just think that our education systems in particular overall did a phenomenal job, and there is no planning for this, but there's planning for something like this, meaning there's planning that something is going to happen. We're all in an evolution of three things. Something's about to happen, something is happening, or something just happened. And how we handle ourselves and how do we regroup and do things is how the result is.
Yeah. And so you want me to lead in. This you just gave a great segue for me to talk about the Chris Norton story.
Hold on. I got one more. I told you I had two. I told you I had two.
You go for it.
So this is a hard one. This is definitely a hard one. So in the last 2 days, I've had two conversations with people. I had a phone call yesterday with someone that said, "What do you think about Green Mountain College?" And I said, I don't know. I feel I'm saddened to hear that a college that's been around for 185 years is closed. Congratulations to the developer that was able to buy an entire college campus for $5 million and is repurposing it for condominiums and going to put a distillery in the library. I mean, it's a little peculiar, but I guess it's, hey, whatever floats your boat. But it's sad to see an institution of that age go out of business. I got a phone call from a friend of mine. Son went to first year of college, played baseball at the college, took his final exam last week. 24 hours later, got a notification that school is not going to be opening up next year. Did a quick search. The last 2 years, 100 colleges and universities have closed in the last 2 years, with another 50 on target to close in the upcoming 12 to 24 months or more. Some of these are very long time historical universities that have housed our kids, grown them, given them career opportunities. I'm struggling right now, to be honest with you. I'm struggling because we also have 3 million open skilled labor positions in the world that need to be filled that you don't need to go to college for, and I'm a huge advocate and endorser of that. I also believe that there's a place for college. We have declining population. We have declining interest. We have skyrocketing tuition bills. We have we're not going to get into politics deeply, but we have a lot going on in politics that is removing funding sources, grants, and things to give people an easier path of getting into college. As that's about as chaotic as it can get in any college USA, right? You're talking about billions of dollars of funding, grant funding being held to colleges like Harvard. They got lots of money, Harvard. From what I understand, they got lots of money. They're probably not going to go out of business next week, but that's a hit even for Harvard. You're a leader in a college campus that is seeing all of this in the headlines and the news, and it might not be affecting you today, but there's going to be a lot of FUD. You know, FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. A lot of FUD flying around. What do you do today to keep your team on the eye on the prize, and what talk do you have there? Because you could have a college that's winning right now, doing a great job, but tomorrow's never promised for any of us. But the way that this is, 150, there's 15,000 colleges and universities in the United States? So we have 1%. And as my grandfather told me the first time I walked past a penny, a dollar without a penny is only 99 cents. We're only at 99% of the colleges and universities we had 2 years ago. What happens when we're 98, 97? What's that look like?
It's a great. So, and I know I don't share this a lot. It is part of my story. So in December of 1984, I'm working at a small college in South Dakota called Yankton College. Now, if you're a football fan, you can think of, if you remember the name Lyle Alzado.
Oh, yeah.
That's where Lyle Alzado went to school.
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember I had been recruiting. It's December. It's like 2 weeks before Christmas, and I go to a basketball game. And the head football coach at the time sits down next to me and goes, "Mike, they're going to close the school." I said, "What?" "They're closing the school, and they're closing it next week. This is basically the last athletic event that's going to happen." And then we found out not only were they going to close, but we were not going to get paid for December as well. And I remember the fear. You talked about the fear, the FUD.
Yep.
Man, I was, neck deep in this. Here I am. I'm married. I got a 6-month-old child. What am I going to do?
Right.
Where am I going to go? All those things. And we navigated that, and things have, sometimes things have a way of turning out great. But to answer your question, and I talked to school districts on this. Matter of fact, was talking to an activities director in western Wisconsin that's looking at some things like what's going to happen, all this. I said, when you have these financial constraints, one of the things that happens that I think is not good is you allow one department or one individual to start coming up with plans. Mm-hmm. I think the better way to do that is saying, we need everybody in this conversation. Mm-hmm. We need teams of people saying, okay, how can come up with a plan? You can be crazy with it, but come up with a plan. Mm-hmm. How can you take what you have and survive? And you do that across the board in all the areas, whether that's in facilities, whether that's in the teaching realm, the athletic realm, saying, all right, folks, this is no different. If you're talking to coaches, this is no different than being down by a touchdown.
Right.
And you only got 4 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
You can't panic. You got to come up with a plan. Yep. You've got this student struggling in a class. You got to come up with a plan. You have your facilities person, and all of a sudden you have this event that's going on that night, and the bleachers break down.
Right.
Okay, got to come up with a plan. And when you sit down and take away the noise and say we need to work together with a plan, now you give yourself a chance. Now there's no guarantees, and part of it is, I think, too many institutions of higher education spent too long thinking nothing like this is ever going to happen to me.
Well, they got money from COVID. I mean, every school,
exactly.
every school got money from COVID. I mean, we're at the COVID fiscal cliff right now with most school districts in the United States, public school districts. I think the colleges were impacted faster.
Yep.
Some of them didn't get funded as much, but some of them did get funded, and
Yep.
I would only assume that COVID sped up the decline in enrollment because people had to do virtual learning, and they're like, well, if I'm not going to live at the dorm and get the college experience, what do I need?
Right. Well, and so very true there. I think the biggest thing is, like I said, you got that, the COVID cliff. You already had a demographic cliff that was happening just because not as many people in that age group.
Mm-hmm.
So you're putting those two things together. Well, that's the perfect storm,
Right.
to put colleges under, and it's also a perfect storm now within that K-12 system.
Yep.
Of how are we going to survive? We're probably overstaffed. We got too much going into some things, and we don't have that money anymore.
Yeah.
So how do we go forward? And you have public. Not every community is going to sit there and pass a referendum to generate more money, from the community. So now you're really struggling. But I think I go back to, I think you really need to work with everybody and not just have that be a singular voice trying to come up with a plan. Because you always do better when you have others helping you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I'm just looking here, just for people to understand. Well, what's interesting? So I just did, because we just said that there, the declining number in population. The greatest generation had 440,000 births. Silent generation had 16.5. Then baby boomers spiked up to 70.1. Then it dropped down to 65 for Gen X, bumped up for 72 in the millennials. So the millennials actually beat the boomers.
Yeah.
I didn't know that until I just looked. And then it went back down with Gen Z, 69.3, and right now Alpha is only at 42.75, but they're not done yet. They're still
Right.
They're still growing into getting. But those numbers, that number. I mean, you look at 440,000 to 16.5 to 70 to 60, the 65 number. Does make a difference.
Oh yeah. Most definitely.
You're gonna have a decline of 5 million students in that generation.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it, and you had to bump up. I mean, you had to build infrastructure from 16.5 births to 70 million births, and that's a 10 years. It's a 10-year gap, right? So,
yeah.
All this stuff is easy, logical sense, and yet we overcomplicate it, and then we go, "What the hell happened?" Right? Yeah.
Well, exactly. And I think the other thing is, you already talked about the trades.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a great friend who actually has served as like a president of Universal Technical Institute. Okay. And there are so many opportunities that we miss upon in that K-12 in terms of showing, here are opportunities for you.
Right.
You don't have to. Here I am. I spent my career at 4-year colleges, but yet I would tell you don't have to be at a 4-year school to realize your own goals, to realize a great life.
Right.
You can go to a community college. You go to a technical institute. You become an apprentice. Do those things.
Right.
You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
There's
never been a greater time than today for you to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. I stand by that. You want to fly to Mars? It's probably going to happen in our lifetime. You want to cut wood? You can cut wood. You want to be a doctor? You can be a doctor. I think that, technology, advancement, whether we like it or not, all these things, I mean, and the ability to learn. Our kids are, I tell people all the time, Gen X is the last generation that won't be smarter than their parents because we have limitations. Our parents are at least in their teens when they have us, which gives them a head start. And the only thing that Gen Xers could do to catch up was do exactly what the parents did, would go to the library, read the encyclopedia, read the dictionary. I mean, you tell your kids today, hey, go get an encyclopedia. Where do you find one of those, right?
Yeah.
So we've gone well into almost 40 minutes of talking, and I know you're chomping at the bit to talk football. I'm chomping at the bit to talk football. I haven't finished the movie as and I think I did. I think I purposely didn't finish watching the movie. I have a feeling I know what happens at the end. I have that feeling, but I wanted to hear it from you, and so why don't, for the sake of I know a little bit, tell us about your football career and obviously the 7 yards story, the Chris Norton story, because you're heavily that's a big piece of your life, right? Yeah. So dig into that.
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've coached football, and along with teaching people to be PE teachers, and ended up in administration. But the football part has allowed me the opportunity to be in a variety of places. I've lived in like 8 different states, and because of it. And so I've met a lot of great people, recruited. There's not many states I have not recruited somebody from. Mm-hmm. And that includes Alaska, Hawaii, the whole bit. I've had the opportunity, I've coached every position in football. I've been offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, I've been a head coach. And all these things have been impactful. But I still, when I was at Luther College, and this was 2010, early 2010, I recruited this young man out of the Des Moines, Iowa area. He was actually Durnin. And great high school athlete, football player, basketball player, track athlete, the whole ball wax, great student, everything. He comes in, he's a true freshman, and playing special teams, backup defensive back. And October 16th, 2010, second half of the ball game, we had just scored. We had not played well in the first half, but second half we took the opening kickoff and drove down the field, scored. Kickoff team goes out there. Chris Norton is out there. He goes down the field, goes to make the tackle. Doesn't get up. Lying there, motionless. He's probably 20 yards away from me from where I was standing on the sideline. I start walking. Medical, athletic trainers are there. Medical personnel are getting there ahead of me. Get there. He can't feel anything. Now he's breathing. He's awake. He has no feeling whatsoever. And in the midst of it takes us, all of a sudden his parents, come down to the field, his parents and his oldest sister. And there's not much you can say in this situation. You're all just kind of, hugs and holding hands and just kind of trying to breathe through it. Fast forward to the end of the game, we ended up, after about 40 minutes, we started playing again after they had taken Chris to the local hospital in Decorah, Iowa. Finished the game, and I remember I'm talking to the team afterwards. Now, Decorah, Iowa is a small town, 10,000 people or so, okay? All of a sudden, as I'm talking to the team, I hear a helicopter. I knew exactly what that helicopter was for. They were life flighting Chris from Decorah to Rochester Mayo Clinic. As I finished talking, the athletic trainer meets me as I'm walking across the field. He goes, Mike, just talk to the doctors. Chris has experienced a fracture of C3, C4, leaving him basically paralyzed from the neck down. And they think there's only a 3% chance that he'll have movement below his neck. Now, you talk about trying to plan for things. Mm-hmm. This was a crucible event. There's no coaching book on this.
Yeah.
In terms of what to do. So I remember my wife and I drove up. My wife actually went to Walmart because she knew the Norton family had not planned to be overnight anywhere. So she went to Walmart and bought toothpaste, toothbrushes, all those kind of incidentals. While I kind of cleaned up some things in my office and talked to some people, etc. Jumped in the car, we get up there. We get to the hospital, get off the elevator, we're walking, there's this long hallway to where the waiting room is. I can see one figure standing in the hallway. It's Chris's mom. This was the same mom that 7 months earlier I sat at a table at lunch while we were recruiting Chris and said, I will make sure we'll take care of your son. Here I am walking down the hallway going to go meet up with the woman who I had said that to and whose son is sitting there ready to go into surgery for a fracture of C3 and C4. Now, as I get closer, I'm thinking, what is she going to do? Is she going to turn around and yell at me? Is she going to hit me? Wouldn't have blamed her for either one of them, to be honest. She turns and looks at me, gives me a hug, says, Mike, they're saying only a 3% chance of movement below the neck, but we're going to believe in that 3%. The power of attitude, right there. The power of love, exemplified in a very simple statement. And we ended up spending the night there. Chris had the surgery, came out. Things went well, but they were still saying only 3%. But this story now became a part of our team. It became a part of our lives. Now, remember, Chris is a true freshman. So all his buddies, he'd only met like 2 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
These buddies started taking trips 2 to 3 nights a week. They would drive to Rochester from Decorah, about an hour, 20 minutes, to go spend an hour, 2 hours with Chris. They were doing exactly what we would love to see anybody do. They were in conversation. They were laughing because laughter promotes healing. The whole bit. They were doing, as I joked with a group the other week, they were doing wheelchair races in the hallways of the hospital. Now, I don't think administration at the hospital like that, but it served a purpose. Keep going on. Chris at Thanksgiving was able to move his big toe.
Yeah, I just got to that. He made a joke about. Yeah, I got to that in the movie. Yeah,
and it's amazing. And this, we talked about listening. The doctors, a couple weeks before that, said, "No, Chris, you're not going to be able to do that. If you think you're doing that, just a phantom, thought process." Well, Chris knew better. All right, and I remember he talked about when the doctor came back, and him and I have had a lot of discussions about this since. One of the first things the doctor said goes, "I apologize. I didn't listen to you. All I was basing it on was medical history, but I didn't listen to you." So he goes, "I apologize for that." Great part of this, this is why it's so important to listen, to find out, to really dig deep when you're listening. Keep going on. Chris goes through this. He comes back to school the next year and starts going through rehab. His whole rehab was unbelievable. They'd say do an hour, he'd do 2. They say 2 hours, he'd do 4. He was constantly doing rehab. And he made a goal for himself. He was going to, in essence, walk across the stage somehow, some way to get a diploma. And he did. Now, he did it with the assistance of what was then his fiance, who helped with that. And one of the things that transpired in this midst of things is Chris was hurt in an NCAA football game. And as such, after his family's insurance basically ran out, the NCAA has what they call a catastrophic insurance policy. So if Chris needed equipment, if he needed access to equipment, if he needed modifications to a home, all those things were covered by the NCAA. He had a case, he still has a case manager to this day. But he realized, and this is an 18-year-old young man.
What year was this?
2010.
Wow.
18-year-old young man who goes, I'm fortunate right now because so many other people who have this type of injury don't have the same access to equipment, resources that I do. Mm-hmm. So him and his father created the Chris Norton Foundation to help with that for those people. Mm-hmm. Started off with, raising $500 at a bike. We did a bike-a-thon. Now, at this point, we've raised over $2 million that we use for grants to facilities. Plus, we run a week-long wheelchair camp right outside of Rochester, and this year we'll have around 30 campers, young people in wheelchairs, and with spinal injuries and or neuromuscular challenges.
Yeah. Along
with their families, because we invite their families to come with them. So we'll have 150, 160 people that our foundation pays all their expenses for while they're at camp. And so he just looked, this is like, how do you transform lives? And Chris has taken this, and of course he speaks all over the country about, here's a challenge. Here's how you stand up. And even though he really can't stand up without assistance, he has stood up to this challenge, and I believe has conquered it in a great way. And that story resonates, because I think of the things that have happened to me since that time.
Yeah.
I got asked, 2.5 years after this accident, Luther College asked me to, quote unquote, resign.
Yeah.
All right, this is a nice political way of saying you get.
Yeah. You decided to leave.
Yeah. So I needed to leave, but I still was able to use the story and say, I'm gonna keep going forward. I'm gonna stand up like Chris is standing up. I talked about how when I got in that role at the University of Dubuque, having those, cases and dealing with those things. This story. Chris's story has transformed me, and it continues to do this day. Now, I've been very fortunate. I actually now serve as the president of his foundation. Chris's dad, Terry, is the executive director. Chris, of course, is the main person. Yeah. But and we continue to look to transform lives. Yeah. By what we can do. So, in it's a unique story. But I know a lot of coaches have different stories that they have gone through, and there's a beauty in athletics when you look past just the scoreboards. Yeah,
and I listened to you speak for a couple of minutes, and then I had to step out, and I came back, and John Stangler from Pewaukee, who thinks the world of you, says, "Oh, 7 yards," and I was like, I don't know what 7 yards. It's 21 feet. Yeah, I got it. I was just trying to figure out what he's talking about. He's like, you don't know? And I was like, just John, I don't know. He's like, that's part of his story. That's part of what he's going to talk about. You got to stay here for it. And I as events go, my day got chaotic, and I sat in as much as I could, and I left, and I was like, I'll order the movie. So 7 yards. I bought it. It's on Amazon. You can buy it. It's a documentary. One of the things that's interesting that struck me, I've never met Chris. I'd love to someday. Sounds like just an amazing, resilient, strong, and I'm going to use the word stubborn person, if I can. Just watching the movie, watching as much of the movie as I did, and it's you see him, like you see this is his life, right? It's not fake. It's him. I'm just sitting here saying this guy had to be really stubborn. For someone to say, you've got a 3% chance, you're not going to do this, and him just persevering the way that he did and setting a goal or goals to the next goal, you have to have and I call it with people, I tell people all the time, be realistically stubborn. So oftentimes people come to you and go, can't be done, never been done. And I'm not comparing it to anything, but, a friend of mine, Todd, who's a farmer, wanted to paddle a giant pumpkin down a river. And he asked me, I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so I was talking to somebody like, it's never been done. I said, but that doesn't mean it can't ever be done. Right. So be realistically stubborn. So the one thing, I mean, the beginning of the movie talked about his high school career a little bit and who he was. But that 2 months of coaching, was he realistically stubborn with you? Like, were there
all the time? He was set on playing as a freshman.
Yeah.
Okay, and he worked hard every day. He was always willing to do extra things, which is why he got on special teams. Why he was a backup defensive back, but he played in every game. Mm-hmm. Because he was just that type of person.
Yeah.
And I truly believe. I mean, he talks about this when he speaks. You think about the importance to him is his faith, his family, and his friends. Mm-hmm. We're going to need others along the way.
Yeah.
And he knows that. You talk about realistically stubborn. Yes, Chris is never going to fully just walk.
Yeah.
Like you and I walk.
Yeah.
But he's taken that and said, I can still make a difference in the world today. And that's what he's doing. He's not letting that stop him.
Yeah. I am sure you've played the play over a million times in your head. I'm sure you on a daily occurrence, right?
Yep.
And you said when it happened, you were 20 yards away, 60 feet, and he was motionless. And I'm putting you on the spot, and maybe this is just going to come out real natural, and maybe it won't. I apologize. But 60 feet, it's about 30 steps for the average human, right? And you specifically said you walked to him.
Yeah.
In earlier part of the discussion, do you think that subliminally you were walking to him to do your getting in the car, exercising, stay calm?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm sitting here, when you said I was walking to him, I'm sitting here saying one of my players is motionless. I'm going to run, and I'm probably going to be hysterical and everything else. And in my brain, I'm thinking, this guy knew enough to walk, to control his emotions, to be able to be present, to be calm.
Well, and here's I walked in the time frame. To be very honest, I mean that whole segment.
Yeah.
I mean it's like a time warp.
Right.
For me.
Fast and slow at the same time.
Yeah, you got it. But I walked in as much because I had to make sure I was taking care of Chris. Mm-hmm. But there was still 80 other people.
Right.
On the sideline.
Right.
That when you are in a leadership role, everything you do is being watched.
Right.
And, it to me, it was like, this is what I need to do.
Right.
I need to just walk out there. I got to trust the athletic trainers and the medical personnel that they know what they're doing, and they did. Matter of fact, I remember after the surgery, a couple days later, the surgeons contacted, and I got copied on some notes, correspondence, them thanking our athletic trainers and people on the sideline because they said their process and how they did everything that day gave Chris a chance.
Yep.
That is part of the, why he does have some movement at this time. And so, I trusted them, walked there, and it was interesting. You talk about the walking part. Both his parents walked. I could see them coming from the stands. They walked on the field. They didn't run as well. Now, his sister didn't run either, but, his sister was kind of a couple steps in front. Now, she was actually in school to be a nurse at the time. So she had some medical training as well. But, staying calm. And I think there's a little bit of faith in there.
Yeah. Well, I think, and again, I don't know any of these people, but again, watching the movie, reading a little bit, and them walking as parents, and as me being a parent of two boys that don't play football or doing things that they could really, really, I mean, we get up and we can get really, really hurt. But as a parent, when I thought about that, what you just said, if I was a parent and that happened, I'd be walking in hopes and taking my time, because life does move very fast and slow in these traumatic events.
Yep.
As a parent, I'd be walking because I'd be hopeful that by the time I got there, he'd be moving. Right.
Yep.
I don't want to run there to make time slow down for me to be sitting there wondering what's going on.
Yep, exactly. I love you just used the word. I use this to describe this whole story. You talked about a traumatic event. Okay, it was a traumatic event. Mm-hmm. But at no time has this event become a tragedy.
Right. Yep.
And I think that has to do with all the people involved throughout that day and throughout the years as we go forward.
Yeah. I'm not that smart, but I kind of look at true tragedy as when we're on the wrong side of the grass.
Yep.
That's, we can deal with traumas and face them as best we can, as long as we have the opportunity to think and do and try. And then the tragedy part is when we can't do that anymore at all. We're completely helpless and lost. So, man, this has been, I could go on for hours with you, and I'd love to have you back on to dig into more of this. But I think we've given some exposure to folks and thinking about not just how to lead and live in chaos, but some nuggets of what's going on in the world, as well as this just phenomenal story. And if you want to support the Chris Norton Foundation, you just go to chrisnorton.org. We'll put that in the show notes. Mike, thank you for joining us. My life is just so incredible to be able to meet people in my journeys that I get to build a bond and a relationship with. And thank you for reading the book and supporting us since we've met. We met in February at the Kalahari in Wisconsin Dells. That's why I said the elevator in Kalahari. They try to trigger things in my brain to always remember where I meet someone, when I meet someone. Everyone says I'm like, you're a human calculator and calendar in your head. And I'm like, well, I just put points, put the Google points in my head. So really appreciate you giving us some of your time today. And we'll definitely have you back on and keep sharing all the awesome that you do and have done and can create for others to think about making sure that they walk or take their time getting in the car to just breathe and stay calm.
Well, Josh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be on your show. And, I loved reading the book because you share a lot of stories that, exemplify, how to live life as well. And in my closing thought, and I leave this with people all the time, it has to do with my handful of L's. And I basically ask people, I say, let us all keep our minds open, our hearts open, and our souls open as we continue to learn, continue to laugh, continue to listen, and continue to live, and continue to love. And when we do that, each of us will not only be blessed by a legacy we leave to others, but more importantly, the legacy others will leave upon us.
Love that.
Thank you very much.
Love that word, legacy. And how do people get a hold of you if they want you to come talk to their group or check in with you?
Best way is to find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only one with a doctor of ministry. So Mike Durnin, check me out on LinkedIn. If you want to talk further, book me an appointment on LinkedIn, and that's the best way. I'm probably a little different from a lot of other. I'm not looking to sell a lot of different things. I just like sharing the story. I'm at a point in my life where I just love giving back. Yeah. And that's what I do.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, and keep living your legacy, my friend. And that will do it for another episode. And I do need to make money. I do need to sell things. But one of my journey goals right now is I want to get to 100 5-star rating and reviews on our podcast platforms. We're at 76. We got 24 to go. Excuse me, 3 weeks before my birthday, give or take, and depending on when this releases. So I need 24 5-star rating and reviews on podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And only if we deserve it. If we don't deserve it, call me. Let me know what I'm doing wrong. Don't just give me a bad rating and review just because you're angry or whatever. Let's talk it through. If you've listened this long, then you got to like something. But give us a 5-star rating and review. We want to get to 24. You do it. Email me, Josh@beawesome, BEAUSM. Tell me you did it. Tell me which one you were. I will send you a copy, paperback copy of our book, absolutely free, personalized, to get us on the chase to 100. So hopefully you will consider that if you haven't done it. If you have read our book and you've purchased it, thank you very much. We've sold a bunch of them. Would love to get your 5-star rating and review on that on Amazon. You don't have to buy the book on Amazon to do it. We just would love you to do it. So in the meantime, if you can be anything, be awesome. Have a great day, everybody.
Come to you from underneath a peach blossom. It's time for an episode of Be Awesome. Find positivity throughout your life and work. Just like our mascot rooster, Steve the Jerk.